Have you ever noticed that whether you practice slow or you practice fast, it always feels like you hit a wall that you can never really pass no matter what you do? Yet the only answers you get from teachers online and videos are practice slow again, or practice faster and it'll work itself out, or just try harder, or relax, all those kinds of things. And none of it makes an actual dent in your progress. And that's because the truth is that it doesn't matter whether you practice slow or you practice fast. The key to breaking speed barriers lies in how you progress from slow to fast. Mess up the order and you'll be wiring your brain in such a way that you'll never play fast. So in this video, we're gonna go over how to wire your brain properly so that playing fast becomes easy and consistent. We're gonna end the slow practice versus fast practice debate with modern neuroscience and practical application. This video is the first in a series of 3 that I'm calling the 3 pillars of speed, and they all go together. This video is about how to practice for speed. Video 2 will be all about how your brain forms your picking motion, and video 3 will be about increasing what I call your raw speed. And over these next 3 videos, we're gonna absolutely bury these unscientific and ineffective methods of teaching speed and practice on guitar. So I need to stress that all of these videos go together. There will be questions that are not answered in this video that are answered in the second video, and so on. Each of my videos is meticulously scripted, researched, read, and reread before filming, and I've done my best to make these for you. I'm even filming in 4K today, so pray the cameras don't overheat and die. So do your best for me and hit the subscribe button so you can watch every video in the series. By the way, I also just moved over all of my stuff to Patreon, so if you want some extra lessons, bonus stuff, behind the scenes, just did a video about my experience at NAMM and how to make the most of it, you can go to the link in the description and sign up for Patreon. That helps me a lot. So if you're new here, my name is Matt, and I grew up on classical string bass. And then I switched to French horn in 10th grade, and I went on to graduate from the University of Cincinnati with a degree in French horn. But I've always had a passion for metal music. And in 2018, at the very late age of 22, I finally got to start playing guitar when my older brother gifted me a very low quality guitar, but I had a lot of fun with it. Inspired by the music of Dream Theater and Symphony X, I had a lot of catching up to do. So like you, I started watching YouTube videos to try to learn, but I was really frustrated and confused with all of the conflicting answers. So in 2021, I finally started getting lessons, and I've collectively paid over $10,000 to go to camps, do lessons, master classes, and study with a lot of world-class guitar players looking for these answers. And some of these people don't even give lessons anymore. So I've learned a lot from those guys, and I give them all the credit in the world for the player that I am today, seriously. But there were still a lot of questions that I didn't have answers for. So that's when I started looking not in the guitar community, and I started applying neuroscience to my guitar, and my practice and progress absolutely skyrocketed. Now, I'm sharing all of that stuff here in this YouTube channel. Before we get into the science, I need to lay down a few ground rules. First, what is practice? I see a ton of people out there who spend many more hours on guitar a day than me, yet they make little progress. And this is because they're merely playing. Practice is defined as the repeated performance of a skill or task with the goal of improving proficiency, efficiency, and accuracy. So it doesn't matter if you play for 10,000 hours if you've never practiced for one. Playing has an important role, but in order to truly improve your skills, you don't just need time on the instrument. You need to practice deliberately. The way that most people get taught to practice is slowly with a metronome. However, there's rarely a structured approach provided for transitioning from slow practice to actually performing music. And as a result, many players only partially learn a piece before trying to move to a faster tempo, hoping that any errors that they had will resolve naturally. And sometimes they do, but a lot of the times they don't. Repeating a flawed performance only reinforces incorrect neural patterns, which will not only impair the ability to perform accurately at speed, but it also leads to unreliable and inconsistent results. Now, the idea of slow practice has been promoted since as early as the 1550s with the idea that, well, if you can't play it slow, you can't play it fast. But modern neuroscience is showing us that that really isn't the full picture. Having come up in the classical world, I had my mind absolutely blown away when I listened to Dr. Jason Sullivan's interview on the Bulletproof Musician podcast on why fast at-tempo practice can be more effective than slow practice.
When we slow things down, we allot for extra time to do so. So it might not create a method that works at the goal tempo. And so sometimes people can reach a ceiling where if you got to play it at 100 beats a minute, You practice it at 50 beats a minute, and you get really good at 50 and 60 and 70, and then all of a sudden you just can't get over 75 beats a minute because the way in which you learned, from an embouchure or motor standpoint, it just can't get the job done any faster. So you essentially have to retrain yourself how to do it, and that can be a frustrating process.
Or maybe you saw Troy Grady's video, Don't Work Up to Picking Speed, Start With It. Both of these sources advocate for playing fast right away. However, if you take a deeper look, both of these sources actually ignore that if you don't already have really great mechanics, just practicing fast will do nothing to actually help solve mechanical issues. And this is something we're going to get very deep into in video 2 with how the brain forms your picking movement. The problem is that if you don't have the total level of skill to overcome the volume of errors you're going to be hitting, you can't optimize anything. And if you've tried fast practice, you've probably experienced this. By the way, the best picking motion is the topic of the next video in the series, so make sure you subscribe for that. So, after all of this research, I was really frustrated by the contradictions between slow down, which has been promoted for so long, and speed up, which seems to be the hot new thing. But when I try it, it doesn't really connect, right? So I began to wonder, what if both approaches are missing something? And it turned out I was right. A successful and consistent musical performance all comes down to something called myelination. Myelination is a process where the brain reinforces neural pathways by wrapping them in a fatty layer, improving the speed and reliability of signal transmission. Think of it like upgrading an old copper wire to fiber optics. Once that circuit is insulated and optimized, signals travel smoothly from the brain to the muscles, ensuring precise and fast responses. With consistent practice, these pathways become more efficient, allowing actions to feel effortless and automatic. Once a connection is myelinated, it can transfer signals literally 10 times faster. Unmyelinated axon conduction velocities range from 0.5 to 10 meters per second, while myelinated axons conduct at velocities of up to 150 meters per second. That's the difference between driving from Los Angeles to New York in 40 hours versus making the same drive in 2 hours and 40 minutes, which is twice as fast as a commercial flight. Now, like we said before, just practicing fast often locks players into sloppy performances, while only creeping up the metronome leaves them stuck, never reaching full speed. Okay, but isn't it true that both slow and fast practices will build myelin? Because when we practice, the brain is going to wrap that connection and you'll get better, right? So if you just keep practicing, then eventually, inevitably, you should be able to reach your goal, right? Wrong. To get to the bottom of it, I asked Dr. Chris Lee, a neuroscientist and executive performance coach. Here's what he had to say.
There is myelination that occurs when we learn something new. So if we take music, for example, and you've been doing a progression wrong your entire life, right? So you have the trigger, and that trigger goes to this neuron over here, which is the behavior, and that's small motor function. And the line between those two things is the nerve fiber that's firing back and forth. And when the brain receives that message, it says, we do this thing, and it does that. And then eventually you get new self-awareness. And instead of from here to here, we go from here down here. And now this pathway is brand new. And that new pathway is not only going to require from here to here, but it requires here to here. And then once it goes here, it goes, oh, wait a second, this is the new thing that we're going to try to do. But this pathway up here is faster. So we always think that it goes from 1 to 2, and then it goes from 1 to 3, but it goes 1, 2, 3. Right? Because we have to go, oh, this new self-awareness and new self-awareness builds that new pathway. And that's the myelination pathway. And then eventually we have a process called extinction. And it'll, instead of going trigger, behavior, result, it'll go, oh, wait, new awareness is the fastest path. So instead of taking this long route, we'll just go not 1, 2, 3, we'll go 1, 3, 1, 3. And once you get to that 1, 3 moment, that is what we would call deep learning has occurred, because you've myelinated that pathway because you've used it so much.
So what does this mean for how we practice guitar? It means that there's a place for both slow practice and for fast practice, but you need to use them at the right time and in the right order and for the right duration. I call this stage 1, 2, and stage 3 practice. Now, before we can get into these steps, I have to give you a few general tips. First, don't practice with a gate on. A strong gate can really affect the articulation of notes and fool you into thinking you're playing a lot more accurately than you actually are. A gate should be used for clamping silence, not an apparent increase in accuracy. Once you're in the end stages of practicing, and only if the riff requires it, then sure, add the gate back in. But for now, keep it off. And one last major tip is to try practicing on a clean sound for about the first half of your practicing. This, again, helps to make sure that you're playing extremely accurately, but more importantly, playing with a consistent velocity. There's no right or wrong answer on when exactly to switch over to your high gain sound. Just do it when you feel like it, but don't put a heavy compressor on the sound as well. A light compressor is fine because a wide open acoustic sound can be pretty dynamic. And personally, I like a little reverb just so things don't sound completely dead. But you don't want to do anything that changes how the tone comes out too much. So, with all that said, let's hop into the stages of practice. When one can play any section of a difficult piece in the required fast tempo, but fails to play the sections in continuity, it is clear that the real difficulty does not lie in the domain of pure motor activity. Rather, it is the inability to think fast enough to estimate the distances and to anticipate and prepare one's playing apparatus for each situation without the slightest delay. George Kochavitsky, The Art of Piano Playing, A Scientific Approach. So, during stage 1, I want to accomplish 2 things. First, I want to make sure that I have the music completely memorized. Second, I want to make sure that I can get through a basic performance at a slow speed before adding a metronome. So I want to get continuity before I'm continuing. This is a lot deeper than just practice slow and the same advice that people have been giving out for ages. So let's talk about how to memorize music easily. And this will sort of happen as you play anyways, but don't skip this section. I'm going to go over a lot of cool tips. So what I'll do is I'll often print off the music or I'll make a basic chart and I'll do a lot of active listening. And during this, I'm breaking down the music into sections. Now this is called chunking and people have talked about chunking a lot. Again, there's little tweaks here that are going to really help you a lot. So chunking helps our brain take a lot of information and break it into smaller, easier to remember pieces. By organizing complex data into smaller units of data, we reduce the cognitive load and enhance our learning and memory. That means that instead of focusing on reading sheet music or tab, our full attention can go to where we're actually executing the music. I like to call this kind of chunking for memorization, or better yet, compression, because it's literally doing the exact same thing computers do when they make a file smaller. I want you to accomplish your compression in a way that makes sense to you. For me, I usually mark out A and B sections, and then maybe I'll mark out some subsections inside of that. Sometimes I'll use shape or what I call keywords. And by analyzing the music, you might recognize that you're working with a certain chord progression. So rather than memorizing music note by note, you can memorize just a handful of chords, a key, and a few general shapes. So let's take a look at the opening riff from Symphony X's Inferno. If you listen to the song, I'd call the first 8 measures section A, and the next section in 5/4 section B. These are the 2 big sections. After that, we could roughly call that section the post-intro, or section C, since it doesn't really reappear in the song again. Next, I'm going to break down section A. We can see that measures 1, 2, 5, and 6 are the same minus one small shift here. If we want to get fancy, we could call this A and A prime, which is noted as A with an apostrophe after. And that leaves measures 3, 4, 7, and 8. 3 and 4 to go together, so I'm just going to treat that as one unit and call it B. 7 and 8 go together, so I'm just going to treat that as one unit and call it C. So in big section A, we have a very simple structure of A, B, A prime, C, or you can just think A, B, A, C, and remember that there's a little tweak on that second A, which is pretty easy to do. So to really drive this home, I'm going to quickly outline section B as well. Section B has the same structure, even though it has more notes in every measure. Notice that in our section B, part A has the same E flat, F, G walk up every single time. So I can take that pattern and put it in the back of my head. And the resulting analysis for this section is again A, B, A, C. So altogether we have section A, B, A, C, and section B, A, B, A, C. Not too much to memorize really now, is it? Now I want to talk about what kind of mistakes are and aren't acceptable, because you are going to make some mistakes when you first start something new. And there are going to be mistakes that are kind of okay to make, and those are what I call memory lapse mistakes, which generally get ironed out as you just play an individual section over and over again. And then there's places where you totally forget or where you inadvertently skip to the wrong section. When you make this kind of mistake, you need to pause, try and think about what section comes next, and then, and only then, look at the music. According to the Talent Code by Daniel Coyle, it's this kind of mental stretching that is proven to increase memory. Little memory lapse mistakes practiced like this will generally iron themselves out of time, But the kind of mistakes that are not acceptable are playing completely wrong notes and also thinking wrong. You need to clean up your thinking. Now, I'm not expecting 100% accuracy every single time from your first run through. But what I do expect is that you know the notes well enough to know where you made a mistake so that you can practice that mental stretching in that moment, pause, and correct it before it happens. That is what enhances the learning. Anytime you're hung up on remembering a particular note, put the training wheels back on and look at the music, go through it a few times, and then take those training wheels back off. Maybe you need to write in another keyword or a chord using a specific reminder like a drawing or a little triangle or some kind of diminished pattern or whatever reminds you of that section of music. Like I'll write words like icy, for example. Using a specific word, in my opinion, is far superior to just circling the note and writing remember or a bunch of exclamation points in your music like I used to do in grade school. So that covers compression, aka chunking for memorization. But now we need to talk about initially taking it to the instrument. So we have our notes in our head, now we're gonna put it on the instrument. So this is still stage one, and what you're gonna do is start practicing without a metronome, making sure that you have complete clarity on where any of the rhythm shifts are, what the rhythms are, any weird finger patterns, what fingerings you're gonna use, etc. You might change some of these things as you go on, but you need to form a plan to get started. Like I was practicing a riff from Pale Blue Dot the other day, I started going through it, and then when I started going through the second section, I was like, oh, okay, actually, that same finger pattern mirrors down here. And I had to do a little bit of relearning, but because I'm always learning in this way, it ends up actually being kind of modular, and it's pretty easy to correct those kinds of things. So now, as you're running through things, whenever you make a mistake in any of these three stages, I always want you to do this. I want you to cue up that mistake as the one thing you're gonna focus on in your next rep. It could be a string crossing that wasn't completely comfortable. It could be a fingering where you played the right note, but maybe you slid into it, or you were just right on the fret wire and it didn't come out quite right. Little things like that. And don't move on from this stage of practice until you're playing with a good flow. I'm gonna say it again. Do not move on until you have a good flow. Otherwise, you're just gonna encode those mistakes when you try to move to slow metronome practice. So now that you know what I'm doing, let's watch some of it in action, and I'll kind of narrate over the top of it. Stage 2, initial optimization in 50 to 80% speed. This is a stage where I'm gonna add the metronome in, but there's a crucial distinction that makes this practice that I'm about to do different from other slow practice. Most people at this stage try to get perfect repetitions before increasing the speed whatsoever, but I actually don't care about perfect repetitions. I'm only looking for about 95% accurate repetitions, and I want to push the speed up very quickly. Remember what Dr. Chris said about the long path and the short path? If we spend too much time practicing slowly, we're just going to be training that long path, and our brain's going to go, oh, we should take this long path all the time. And what we really need to do is get our brain to prefer the short path. So if you do that long path, you're gonna have a really hard time ever playing fast. That's why that happens. So that means if you built the ABC path in your brain to perfection, you're literally not gonna use it anyways. It's a waste of time. Still, there's a problem. We have to cross the gap from our initial performance level to playing somewhat fast in the realm of 80 to 90%. And you'll see how this works in just a second. So our goal now is to take our rough performance and smooth it out and connect the different sections and technique shift. So we're getting initial performance, now we're connecting those sections. So once you do this, you'll likely be able to jump from around 40 to 60% up to around 70 or 80%, or maybe a little more depending on the riff. Our goal at this stage is not to go fast. That's what stage 3 is for. So we're solely focused on ironing out any performance glitches. So just like in the last stage, any mistake you make, I want you to take it up and cue it up in your brain as the main thing to focus on for your next rep. Same process, but now with a metronome, which will force you to iron things out even more. So at this stage, we're gonna start using a tool called the Speed Trainer, available in Guitar Pro. If you don't have Guitar Pro, I highly recommend it, and I'll leave a link for it below. So what the Speed Trainer does is it basically acts like a coach sitting right next to you, and every time you complete a rep, the coach increases the metronome just a little bit, forcing you to go a little faster. These increases in speed act somewhat like a timer, creating a sense of urgency for your brain. And I learned from Dr. Chris that that sense of urgency means better brain engagement and more deep learning. Now there's a big catch with the speed trainer. Most people don't know that you can customize the Guitar Pro speed trainer to do a custom speed increment and a custom number of repetitions. The default for the speed trainer is these massive 10% jumps with 1x repetition. So you go, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. That doesn't work. So these jumps are way too big. And at this stage, we want to take the speed trainer and set it up for a 2% speed increase every 1 repetition. This specific setup will allow you to move through speed decently quickly, but not so quickly that you don't have time to correct small errors and think about them. And a lot of the small errors that you make, you can just kind of hit on the next rep. Typically, I set the starting percentage for around 40 to 60%, depending on the riff. Big time, depending on the riff. So try it out and find a starting place that feels good. If 40% is too easy, then crank it up. If 45% is too easy, then crank it up until you have a tempo where you can perform smoothly, but you still have a little bit of time to think about your errors. Your goal here is ironing out any of the clunkiness from stage 1. So to set up the speed trainer properly, first click the 3 dots next to the metronome and the hourglass icons near the track name in the top center, then click repeat countdown. That means that each time before you play, you're going to get a count off and you'll have a little bit of time to reset. Next, click the drop down next to the tempo percentage and then click custom values. This will let you specify the starting tempo, speed increment, and the number of reps. Let's try it out. Now there's one more major trick that I want to give you as you explore this next stage of practice. If you remember the mental stretching we talked about in the first stage, well, we need to apply a slightly different sort of mental stretching here. As you do your subsequent reps, you're going to make some mistakes. Some are going to be small, some are going to be big. If you have big mistakes, then you probably need to go down in tempo so that you can correct those, re-memorize if your memorization isn't sufficient, but mostly it'll be small mistakes if you're following this process. So as you continue your reps, I want you to mentally log any of the mistakes you make from the past rep and specifically focus on your mind on not making that one mistake during your next rep. So this will allow you to chip away individually at problems that you have connecting pieces of your performance. So it's a little bit like playing a game of musical whack-a-mole where, one issue is really obvious and you take care of that one first and then another one pops up. So you focus on that one, then the first one pops back up a little bit. And then each time you go back and forth between all those issues, they require a little bit less work until they're totally gone. After you've used the speed trainer for a little while, you're likely to find that progressing your first 20 or 30% was actually pretty easy. Fantastic. You do not and should not spend a bunch of time at these slow tempos. Remember, our only goal is to smooth out the performance, and now that you have a smooth performance, you can usually immediately jump to around 80 or 90% speed if you didn't already just progress up there. Again, it really depends on the speed and the complexity of the riff. You're not going to get everything on day 1. So what this is going to do is it's going to prevent your brain from making that long A, B, C path, and instead you're starting to reinforce that A to C path right away while only building as much of that A, B, C path as much as you needed to. So now we finally arrived at glorious stage 3 of practice. We've gone from initial memorization to a rough performance without a metronome through a smooth performance, and now it's time to take it all the way up to 100% with speed and style. And this is where we transition kind of from working on that ABC path, which was kind of stage 1 and stage 2, and now we're really just focused on that AC path. So during this stage, I adjust the speed trainer and I go from 2% increases and 1x reps to 1% increases and 2x reps. This continues to push my speed a little bit, but in a slower way. And the increased repetitions give me mental space and just repetitions to focus on different aspects of my playing, such as nailing the shift or making the trill just right, or any other high-level aspects of musicianship. By the way, if you like what I'm covering here, there are even more of these speed strategies, plateau breakers I like to call them, inside of my course, Perfect Picking. Perfect Picking is my step-by-step system for fixing your wrist picking motion and speeding it up faster than you ever thought possible while also eliminating pain and unnecessary tension. There's also a few exercises in there which I like to call plateau breakers, which tie directly into this video. And this system, I've already demoed it on over 20 people. It's worked for literally every player I've ever tried it on, whether they've played longer than me, whether they already play faster than me. You know, there's a guy who's in there's 20, I have a person who's like 60, I have a person who's 13, I have another guy who's been playing 20 years, a Berkeley guy in there. And all this works because it's, as you're seeing in this video, it's based on physiology and neuroscience, and so just play faster and all those kinds of things. So if that interests you, if you really want to speed up your picking stuff, all of the answers are inside Perfect Picking. Go there, there's a special launch discount right now, and I'll see you inside. So now let's talk about what to do if you get stuck. I want you to go back and isolate the individual measure that you're having trouble with and work it up on the speed trainer individually. This could end up being a very small section, just a bar or two, and you might need to isolate it down to 70 or even 60%. Whatever it takes, just make absolutely sure not to just highlight the single bar. Make sure to include the transition into the next section. For example, these bars in Alex Campbell's Bach to the Future plagued me for years. It wasn't until I started including the transition to the original section that I was finally able to play it with full connection. Once you've ironed out the performance, you can start to put that bar or two back into the context of the full riff. You know, you can play maybe that, 1 or 2 bars, and you can go to 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe add in some bars before. So you're working from the micro to the macro. So using some stage 2 stuff, and then going back into stage 3 stuff until you're all the way up at 100%. So as we wrap up here, I want to give you a warning. You've just learned a bunch of really amazing, super cool stuff about practice. And if you follow this system, you're going to make amazing progress. But what I don't want you to do is get so caught up in doing it the right way that you never practice and that you never just spend significant hours on the instrument. There's no substitute for just practicing or just playing and trying. Don't use practicing imperfectly as an excuse for not practicing. There's no excuse for not putting in the hours if you really want to do something with this music thing beyond your bedroom. In fact, you'll probably find that your practice time actually goes down using this method, and just like if you fly a jet with the afterburners on all the time, it's going to run out of fuel faster, and your brain works the same way. And after your practicing brain is exhausted, if you want to keep building time on the guitar, just go play stuff for fun, play stuff you know already. Work on something that's easy, work on something else like a transcription or writing music or doing some kind of programming thing that you need to do with your pedal board or whatever it is. There's always more work to be done. So now you can see why the black and white views of just do slow practice or just do fast practice are like dead wrong, and this middle approach that's so much better. And doing things this way is a huge reason why I've been able to accomplish so much in such a short period of time. If you want to see, this kind of practice a little bit more long form, I actually already did a live practicing Pale Blue Dot where I used this exact method. So, like I said in the beginning, this is just one of 3 tools that you need to play fast. So make sure you're subscribed. If you want to support me, sign up on Patreon. I really hope this helped you and makes sense. Watch it again, take notes. If you want to support me, you can go to the Patreon. You can sign up for the email list. Make sure you're subscribed. I think I got everything. All right. Hope this helped. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.